If a man planted a vineyard, his occupation was viewed as vital, so much so that he was even exempt from military service. His days were filled from beginning to end with the tedious work involved in caring for his crop. First, he needed to clear the land of all the stones and then plant the choice vines. Afterwards, he needed to water and ensure that the vines were receiving enough sunlight. He needed to prune the branches so that the grape harvest would be abundant, guard his crop from the wild sour grapes that always threaten to infect the harvest, build a wall around the vineyard to keep out thieves and hungry animals, build a watchtower in the middle so that he could provide additional protection, much like a shepherd who was guarding his sheep, cut a wine press out of rock, and then dig a vat into the earth to store the juice while it fermented. In addition, he needed to harvest the crop in the fall and make the wine. Can you imagine? This was such hard work that oftentimes the vineyard owner would need to hire workers to help him complete his daily task. As Jesus found himself in the midst of this very important conversations with his disciples, he may have reflected back on the wine that they had just finished drinking at the Passover meal. And he may have thought, aha, vineyards. Now, this is something they're sure to understand. For surely the disciples would have known about vineyards in Israel, and quite possibly they could have worked for a season or two in a vineyard of a family member when they were growing up. And so Jesus begins his analogy using the vineyard as a basic skeleton on which to hang the different parts of his illustration. He starts by identifying himself as the true vine and God as the gardener. Now, one might wonder, well, what does he mean when he says he's the true vine? I suspect Jesus is wanting his disciples to see a dramatic shift in the use of this metaphor. For you see, the allegory of vineyard planting is used all throughout the Old Testament to describe God's relationship with Israel. And there, Israel is depicted as the precious vine planted by God. I'm reminded of Psalm 80, which says, "You, God, brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and you planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took deep root and filled the land." So what went wrong? Why does Jesus no longer want the disciples to see Israel as a vine? And why is he using himself now in place of that in this metaphor? Well, Isaiah 5 may give us the answer. "Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it only yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard than I have not already done? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield only wild grapes? And now I tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no more rain upon it." It's not the peaceful image of a beautiful vineyard, ripe with a bountiful harvest that one might expect from God's chosen people. No, for Isaiah tells us how Israel turned from God, forsaking the very one who planted them in fertile soil and cared for their needs, the one who kept watch over them and built a hedge around them to protect them from their enemies. I think the disciples certainly would have been familiar with this Hebrew metaphor of God's vineyard. So Jesus begins by drawing in on what is familiar to them and then changing a vital component of the illustration. He wants his disciples to see him now as the vine, the true vine, the vine planted on earth by God. Jesus is the strong base on which the branches can grow, and the one who contains the rich sap of life necessary for the branches to be healthy. It is his life, his love, his communion with the gardener, and the shedding of his blood the fruit of the vine, that create the possibility for us to be the true people of God. Jesus then goes on to explain to the disciples that they are the branches that grow from the vine. It's the part of the plant that has the capability and the responsibility of producing the fruit. He proceeds to lay out a vivid picture of the fruit-bearing process and the gardener's very active role in that. First, he talks about the branches that bear no fruit at all. And many of our biblical translations say that the gardener actually goes in and cuts off these branches from the vine. Another way of translating the Greek word arrow, however, is to pick up or to lift up. And that's a very different image. Bruce Wilkinson, the author of Secrets of the Vine, suggests that this might actually be a more accurate way of understanding what Jesus is trying to say. Bruce was speaking at a pastor's conference on the West Coast, and he ran into a vineyard owner from California. The man shared with him that new branches have the tendency to trail down and to grow along the ground. But they don't bear fruit down there, he said. When branches grow along the ground, the leaves get coated in dust. And when it rains, they get muddy and mildewed. The branches become sick and useless. Well, what do? Bruce asked. Do you cut them off and throw them away? Oh, my, no, exclaimed the vineyard owner. The branch is much too valuable for that. We actually go through the vineyard with a bucket of water, and we look for these branches. And when we find them, we pick them up and we wash them off. And then we carefully hang them up on a trellis. The sun reaches them, and pretty soon they are thriving. You know, for Christians, sin is very much like the dust that covers the grape leaves. It doesn't allow the fresh air and the light of Christ to get in. We become stuck in the muck, so to speak. And for some of us, it may be hard to change the direction in which we're growing. That's when the loving gardener comes in and works to move us to a place where ultimately we will flourish.